Hello and welcome to Virtuos. This video will be a review of Rangers of Shadowdeep, a solo/cooperative war game. Rangers of Shadowdeep is an affordable and beginner-friendly cooperative skirmish tabletop wargame which can also be played solo. And to crank up the difficulty and with some house ruling, a game master can be easily added into the mix to make it more difficult for the heroes. The game is created and self-published by Joseph McCullough, the creator of Frostgrave. The designer of the game is very active with the game even months after its release and will answer questions and be in touch with the community on the Facebook group, which is always a good thing to hear, that the designer didn't just dump the game on the market and hope for the best. Also, several additional adventure modules have been released for the game since its release. All in all, I would call the game easily the beginner's first steps into wargaming, but still it has enough depth to keep a more experienced gamer hooked for tens of hours. The review will follow the following order: rules and readability, flow of gameplay, story and setting, published adventures, community support, and in the end the conclusion. So let's get started with the rules. First, you build a ranger as your main character and choose how to distribute build points. You want a fast and agile archer or tanky and slow warrior. Then you choose companions by spending recruitment points. Companions range from archers to swordsmen to spellcasters, and you will always have at least 5 models on the table on your side, usually more. Depending on which kind of companions you choose, the numbers will vary. So we're talking of a small warband here. You get to add weapons and skills to your main character at the character creation phase, but also through leveling and looting in between scenarios. For the actual gameplay, the rules are quite simple and fast to grasp. You use the D20 for all rolls. All the characters and monsters have basic stats like move, fight and shoot, among others. You get 2 actions per turn, which of one must be movement. You get to move up to your move stat in inches per turn, and the second action can be used for actions like fight, shoot or cast a spell, or move half of your movement stat. The game also has rules for climbing, swimming and falling. For actions you roll a d20 for your character and 1 d20 for the enemy model you are in combat with, and add the specific stat or skill to whatever you are doing. So if you attack with your melee weapon, you add your fight stat to your d20 and the opponent fight stats to their roll. Then you compare the result and the higher result always wins. After that you subtract the character of the lower result's armor from the winning result and you have your damage, which you subtract from the character's health depending on things like weapon type and immunities. The d20 will make the game quite swingy because most of the companions have about 10 to 30 HP, meaning that a natural 20 from even a smaller creature will nearly one-hit kill a character. The game also has rules for critical hits though. For shooting it works the same, but the target character will not get to do damage back if it wins the roll. For the enemy movement and the AI, as they call it, enemy movement happens with simple rules. If a player character is in line of sight of the monster, it moves towards it equal to its speed, and if it's not in line of sight, it moves into a random direction. This rule works about 90% of the time, but there are moments where the players can cheese through encounters by abusing this mechanic, which is not a good thing in my opinion, but can be homebrewed so that it works and cannot be abused. I have homebrewed rule for this mechanic, which is similar to the Zombicide noise markers, meaning that whenever a character makes noise, as in attacks, the monster will move towards that point if it has nothing in line of sight. The thing that makes the game unique and fun is skill rolls. For tabletop RPG gamers, this concept is quite easy to grasp. In Rangers of Shadowdeep, the scenario setup and special rules will describe when to roll for skill checks. One example is that you choose a figure to roll perception to alter the starting conditions of the scenario to your advantage, if you win the roll of course. For example, move one enemy towards you or spawn an additional treasure on the table, or something along the lines of that. The game also has skills like strength, lore reading and picklock, to name a few. Some of these skills are used more than others in the scenarios in the first book, And this whole concept with skill rolls almost make this game feel like a tabletop RPG at some points, and they add quite good flavor and also a working game mechanic. The rules are written in easy to understand way, and the book has little to no loopholes or problems on how to interpret them. One thing I would have liked is that the monster stat block should have been more packed in. Now you have to keep turning from page to another if you had a scenario with multiple different monsters. I ended up writing the stats on paper in an easy to read format because of this, but all in all the rules are easily taught in about 15 minutes to a friend and another 15 minutes to build up a scenario and start playing. So for convention gaming or showcase type of stuff for beginners, it's also a handy game. Another unique mechanic in the game is event cards. The scenarios usually last about 8 turns. At the end of each turn the players draw a playing card and read the corresponding event description from the scenario rules. It might spawn new monsters on the table or even sprout vines from the ground that entangle players unless they manage to win a strength roll. The event cards add the much needed random element to the game so that you can easily replay the same scenario several times and every time come up with a different route to victory. Also, by placing the terrain pieces differently for each game of the same scenario will make it feel like a new scenario altogether. So, for the flow of the game, it is very fast and easily played. I like a game where the setup and turn is fast so that your friends around the table won't have to wait 15 minutes where you throw a bucket of dice on the table. This game handles the turns quite well. The setup for a scenario take about 5 to 10 minutes depending on what the scenario is, and most of the scenarios have about half a page worth of text on how to build a table, including special rules and placement of the initial monster spawns. From here on out the scenario will take from 30 minutes to 90 minutes depending on the player's understanding of the rules and how much do you need time to do calculations like 15 plus 3 plus 2. Here I will show you a short turn of how the game might go. I won't go through a whole turn of the game, but I will show how a single combat with an event phase might go. First, I decided to move my ranger 5 inches towards the zombie and attack it with my two-handed axe. I roll d20 for the ranger and add my fight stat of +2 and the enemy's fight stat of +0 to their rolls. Because I have a friendly figure in combat with the zombie, I also added +2 because of a rule regarding additional characters in the same combat. I roll quite badly, so I decide to use my one-time use of skill Hand of Fate to reroll 1 die. Now I managed to roll better and get a hit of 15 with the modifiers and add the damage modifier of +2 because the hit was done with a two-handed weapon. Then I subtract the armor from the damage and mark the remaining 1 HP with a d6 next to the zombie. My turn ends here and we go to the event phase where I draw a 6 of hearts. This card means in this scenario that I must place another zombie on the table edge. So, more spawns, more things to kill. The turn ends here and I move to the next turn. So as you can see the flow is pretty much this way without of course the monster phase and additional friendly figures on the table, but you get the idea of the combat here. The amount of dice is kept low so that the mathematical calculations aren't too big and time consuming. Once again, this is one of the main reasons I say this is a fast and beginner friendly game. The only hindering mechanic is regarding the additional characters in the same combat. But the rulebook depicts all the situations very well, and after a few scenarios it doesn't really take more than a few seconds to understand what the final combat modifier is. Welcome to the dark and dangerous world of Shadowdeep, a vast realm permanently covered in black clouds where evil plots and greeds. This is how the introduction in the rulebook starts. The setting of the world is grim and dark. A mysterious force of evil called Shadowdeep has expanded and destroyed villages and towns while slowly expanding deeper into the kingdom. The Shadowdeep comes with its own monsters and environmental hazards that we see in the scenarios and in the event cards. The player characters called Rangers are trained trackers and fighters who form small skirmishing warbands that recon and fight the creatures of the Shadowdeep. The underlying plotlines are quite shallow but deep enough to get a nice feel of the world. For example, the rulebook describes the Kingdom of Alador only in 1 page and all the surrounding areas around it. Desert to the north, Great Forest to the south, and so on. The rulebook doesn't really look down that much with the setting, and things can be homebrewed easily to match your needs, and the rules are open enough to work around that. The main humanoid enemy in the first few missions are gnolls, but you can easily just proxy them as orcs or goblins if needed. If you wanted your warband to be a band of man-sized humanoid mice, as I've seen in the Facebook group a while back, you could even do that, and it would fit into the world of your own version of Rangers of Shadowdeep. The setting describes forests and deserts, but nothing stops you from making a Kingdom of Alador a frozen wasteland like Frostgrave, for example. Of course, some of the scenarios will have flowing rivers or other elements that might contradict with the idea of a completely frozen wasteland. Much of the story and feel of the world comes from the campaign and missions in the rulebook. Throughout exploring and finding clues and treasures, you learn more about the world of Shadowdeep and its monsters, so in a way, it's also a good thing that not all the lore has been spoiled in the initial description of the setting, and it might even be that you will miss some of the clues on your first playthrough and there are still mysteries to uncover for your next playthrough. Published adventures. The first mission is a good way to build up how the game works, and it works in a way as a tutorial to that regard. The published adventures are very well fleshed out and easily replayable. The first bigger campaign, called Burning Light, that appears in the core rulebook is a great depiction how a solo wargame campaign can be made so that the feel of mystery stays in the air throughout the whole game. It has a large list of notes that are referred throughout the campaign when you pick up clues or complete certain objectives or skill rolls. Much like in Dungeons and Dragons, but this time there is not a game master telling you what happens, but it is in the hidden note in the last pages of the book that you have to go through for each of the clues that you pick up. If you have ever played Sherlock Holmes board games, you will see the similarity here. The rest of the published scenarios are smaller in terms of campaign length, but still give a balanced and fun experience to the game, and they also add different companions, treasure, and mechanics to keep things fresh. So all in all, the adventures that come with the book give you gameplay of easily a few dozen hours, and when the other published adventures are added on top, you will easily keep playing this game for weeks on end without ending with content. Since pretty much all the scenarios can be played several times, and some even have a challenge mode that makes them a bit harder. I feel that one thing that is missing is a supplement that gives rules to build your own scenarios. An experienced wargamer or board gamer can easily read between the lines of the existing scenarios and build their own, and this is how we end up to check on the community support. The Facebook group of Rangers of Shadowdeep has a very active community with players creating their own ways to play the game, build terrain, kitbash miniatures, and even create their own scenarios or homebrew rules for the game. And to top this off, even the designer of the game is semi-active in the community and listens to feedback, and a while back even released playtest rules for higher difficulty regarding multiple players. When checking the file section of the group, you can find several scenarios that are usually quite good and fun to play. Some people have been homebrewing the game to fit more of a sci-fi setting or even a Star Wars version of the game. Just change the bows to pistols and swords to lightsabers and you're good to go. Some have gone as far as to create a totally playable multi-scenario campaign with random elements like world building, out-of-game actions like taverns, training skills, and even rules for traveling. So in conclusion, even if you breeze through the content through the core rulebook, there is no telling when you have finished all the adventures that there is to the game. I also created a 4-scenario long campaign for the game, and after playtesting it works wonders. I also started creating rules for creating scenarios by randomly rolling on tables for the setting, monster type, terrain setup, and so on. So, in conclusion, the game feels something like a mix of a tabletop RPG because of the skill rolls and mystery behind the unknown forces of the Shadowdeep, and a war game because of the basic rules for movement, dice rolling, and the way the scenarios are built with 3D terrain elements most of the time. By reading comments on the forums and Facebook, it seems like this game has gotten many people into tabletop wargaming for the first time, since it's easy to learn, fun, and still deep enough to sink hours into it. If you wanted a game with competitive edge to it and the min-maxing was crucial to your success, then this game is not much for you. The game can be played hardcore with min-maxing, but as with all solo/cooperative games with deep rules, it might become too easy to just use cheesy methods against the AI monsters. So some kind of role-playing might be a fun thing to do, at least in terms of character creation. Even the rulebook tells you to first come up with a mental image of the ranger, so that the first thing you do is not think of numbers and stats. So, pros: easy to learn, fast to play, tons of content and replayability even for a cooperative game, unique and fun mechanics. Cons: AI is shallow and sometimes easy to abuse, difficulty scaling is too forgiving with several players, small amount of different weapons, abilities and spells compared to other war games. Though, with more, the game would get more complex and harder to get a grasp on, I think. I will not be grading the game myself, but I'll say that it is rated at 8.8 out of 10 on BoardGameGeek, where for example Pandemic is rated at 7.6 and Terraforming Mars is 8.4, to give some insight into the ratings. All in all, the game has something for everyone and is a valuable addition to anyone who likes cooperative or solo gaming. Also, for experienced players, the game has enough depth to keep them interested for hours on end. Let me know in the comments below if you have different opinions on the game, and thank you for watching. See you next time.